What is up, everyone? Welcome to the second episode of the full-time GoDev program, where we are building the JSON API, the hotel reservation project in Golang from scratch. So basically, in the previous episode, we did a project setup, right? We did some basic stuff, we did some basic organization. And in this episode, we're going to do more database stuff, MongoDB related database stuff with some interfaces and all that stuff, right? So what I want to show you basically is the hotel reservation GitHub repository, which is in the full-time GoDev. If you don't have access, please send me a mail, reply on this course. You can put something in the comment, DM me your GitHub username, and I will add you, and you will have access for the rest of your life to the project files. So for the people that don't know, every single episode, every single state of the video will have a tag, right? And if you click on tags here, you will see this tag, and this is basically episode 1. And if you click on that tag, you can basically have the source code and everything, and you can check that out here with this thing, boom, and then you're gonna have all the files needed. You can actually check that out, and then you will have that on your VS Code or Vim or whatever you're using, Golang, whatever. You will have that exact state of that episode, right? So you can follow along much better. Okay, that's the thing, right? So yeah. Boom, we're gonna move this away. Yes. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna Vim into this thing. So let me open up main here. Yup. So we have this stuff. It's pretty fine. Everything was working cool. The next thing we're going to do is implement MongoDB. So basically, let me open up a README here. README. So for the people, I already have MongoDB installed, right? You could install it natively. You could install it with with Docker. And if you want to do it with Docker, here, installing MongoDB as a Docker container, the only thing you need to do is copy this line, paste it in. If you have Docker installed, of course, and I'm not going to cover that. You guys are smart enough to install Docker, and I'm pretty sure you're smart enough to install MongoDB. But if you really want to do it quickly, you can copy this thing, paste it in your terminal, press enter, and Docker will run it, and it's all fine, and we can start off, right? Don't forget these ports here, very important. Just copy, pastorino, and you be Gucci. Okay, main. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to test some stuff, and then we're going to structure stuff, right? That's the first thing we do. That's the thing I want to learn to you is first make things happen, and once they are working, then we're going to structure them into a better position, a better place in our project, more maintainable stuff, right? So let me open up. It's going to be, oh man, I need to swap around. So basically, I'm going to copy this thing here. Copy this. I'm gonna paste that somewhere in here. Paste, hop, press enter. I'm gonna show you it real quick. Boom. So we're gonna have this. Zoom in, please. So what we need to do is this is a go get MongoDB stuff. That's the first thing we're gonna do. So we're gonna open up our terminal. We're gonna paste that stuff in, and we're gonna press enter here. Hop, just like that. It's already been done. That's what we need. And the next thing is we're going to check how we can make a connection. So this environment loading, that's not what we're going to do yet. This one is what we need. It's a little bit an annoying website, to be honest, but I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to main here, and then I'm going to paste that inside of here. Boom, just like that. So now we're going to have a client. And you can see that we already have a context to do. And that's why we already learned about the context, because if we want, we can cancel our queries. If our queries takes too long, we can cancel that, right? It's basically the last episode of the concurrency lessons here. Options client, apply URI. There's going to be a problem here. It's basically could not import that stuff, but it can. That is just Vim and his memory. So we're going to say, first of all, we're going to make a Mongo. Actually, to be honest, we're going to say a DB URI. And that's going to be the endpoint of our database, right? And you do it like this, MongoDB // and it's going to be on localhost. And the port is going to be 2707, I guess. And we're going to replace this URI with DB URI. What's going on here? Just like that. And then we are going to, instead of a panic, we're going to do a log fatal out. It's a little bit more nice. And then we're going to do an fmt println of the client. And then I'm going to do a make run here. Let's see if it's going to work. You see it's working perfectly fine, although I get some complaints, but it is what it is, right? It's fine. So I'm going to close this up, open it up. This is the normal Vim like that. Boom. Main, boom. And now these arrows should be away. Yes. A little bit annoying, but hey, need to deal with that. So that's our client. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to try to basically insert a user. We're going to try to fetch that user, and then we know that everything is working, and we're going to do our structure here, right? So how are we going to store a thing? I think we need to do something like client. Then we're going to say database, and the database name is going to be, let's make a constant real quick. We're going to say DB name. That's going to be hotel reservation. Yeah, perfectly fine. And we also need to make a collection, right? We're going to have a database, and then we're going to have a collection. Users, hotels, rooms, admins, whatever. So we're going to say users collection is going to be users, plural. So we're going to say client database DB name dot collection is going to be users call. That's our collection. So we're going to say call is going to be, actually, to be honest, user call, but let's say call for because we already have this user call variable right here, right? Are we recording? That's pretty important. Yes, we are. So that's our collection. Now we're going to find a user. So insert the user first. So we're going to say call. Insert one. And we need a CTX, right? That's very important. So we need to make a context. Once again, we know how we're going to do. We're not going to make some with timeouts. We're just going to make a new context background, right? So we're going to say context background. And then we're going to paste in this context here. And we need to insert a user, right? So we need to make a user first, right? So we're going to say user is going to be a pointer. Actually, no pointer. We're going to say types.user. Let's save this. And then we're going to say first name. Let's zoom in a little bit here. Yeah. First name is going to be James. And then we're going to copy that. And we're going to say last name is going to be at the water cooler. Just like that. We don't need to specify an ID. That will be automatically being done. And then we're going to say insert me the user, right? And I think this is going to return as a result and an error, right? So we need to check that error. So we're going to say if error is not nil. We're going to return, actually we cannot return. We're going to say log fatal. Log fatal this error, and then basically instead of printing this client, we're going to print out the res, right? That's what we're going to do. And then we're going to make a run real quick, and then we're going to see, not then, that's a problem. Oh yeah, I think I know the problem here. So let me open up my beloved tool here. I'm gonna, just a second guys. Can I connect here? What's going on here? Connect, disconnect. Right, so I have this, I'm using MongoDB Compass to inspect. I recommend use the same. It's very interesting. It's very nice, easy to use. If you want to use something else, hey, be my guest. No problem. I'm going to connect here. I'm going to have some trading light stuff. That's for my job. But I'm going to open up hotel reservation. And we can see there is one user. And we have a problem. Because you see this ID here. This ID is empty, right? And the problem is that we need to open up our user here in types. And we have an omit empty here with JSON, but we also need an omit empty with a BSON, because otherwise it's going to think that the ID is going to be an empty ID, but it's not true. So we're going to omit this. We're going to remove ID from our user, and then it's going to automatically create an ID for us. So that's very important. So if you're going back to main, and we're going to run this again, make run, right? Then we're going to have an object ID. Look at this, how beautiful. So if we go back to MongoDB and we're going to refresh here, we're going to see that we now have James at the water cooler with an ID. So we're going to take this guy and we're going to get him out of here, right? Boom. So the next thing we're going to do is kill the server, and it's working now. I don't know what it was. It was a problem in the previous episode, not quite sure. I just rebooted the whole terminal and it was fine. And I'm working on WSL on Windows, and I think I'm going to swap to my gaming PC and I'm going to install Linux and use that because I don't know, it's just a little bit annoying sometimes, this Windows thing with WSL. So yeah, the next thing we're going to do is, once we inserted this user, we're going to try to find him. So we're going to say call find one. So we're going to find, what's going on here? We're going to find one user, and we're going to pass in our CTX, and then we need to do a bson m, which is going to be a query, an empty query, so it's going to find the first one it can find. With this bson m, we're going to specify queries, right? But right now, we want to just find one user because we only have one, so it's going to be fine. I think we need to decode this, right? We need to decode this in a user. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to make a new user. Let's call this James. It's going to be a types.user. Just like that, and then we're going to pass in a pointer to James, right? A reference to James. That's very important because it's going to decode, right? It's going to take the address of James and it's going to inject the values it finds in the database. So it's very important. We need a pointer because you know from the lesson, the pointer lesson, that if we do not specify a pointer here, then after this function is being completed, James will be empty. But if we pass a reference, it can inject the values into the memory address. So yeah, I think this is going to return an error. So we're going to say if r is not nil, and boom, we're going to do a log fatal. A log fatal, by the way, of this error, and then we are going to fmt println, and we're going to print James. Boom. Do we have a problem? Res not used. That's true. We don't care about this res actually. So we're going to underscore this. We're going to mute this variable. And because it says no new variables on left, because error is already initialized here, we can actually delete these semicolons, right? And we're going to say make a run. Boom. And then you see this is basically the user it retrieves from the database. Easy. Storing, retrieving, all been done. It's time to make things pretty, right? Okay, so what we're gonna do is we have API, we have types. Now we're gonna make a folder for our database, right? So we are gonna make a folder. What is going on? We're gonna make a folder here, and we're gonna call this. You could call it store. You could call it DB. Let's call it DB. It's fine. Let's call it DB, right? And inside of DB here, I'm going to make a new file. And I'm going to call this, because what we're going to do is we're going to do something very neat. We're going to work with interfaces, and we are going to split up each domain actually into separate storages, into separate databases, right? For example, a user store, a booking store, a hotel store, and all that stuff. So we're going to say the file name is going to be userstore.go. Yes, that's what we need. So there's going to be package DB. This is very important stuff we're going to do right now. So the first thing we're going to do here in user store is we're going to make a type, and we're going to call this db.userstore, right? And that's going to be an interface, right? Because if we make this an interface, we can actually implement it how we want. We could make a MongoDB user store, we could make a PostgreSDB user store, we could even make an in-memory DB user store, right? And it's going to have a couple of functions, but the first function we definitely need is get user by ID, right? And that's going to take in a string, right? And it's going to return two things. It's going to return a pointer to a types user and an error, right? And then we're going to make another type, and that's going to be the Mongo user store. And that's going to be the actual implementation, right? User store is the interface. Mongo user store is the implementation. And we could actually make, for example, an other store. It could be, for example, a Postgres user store and all that stuff, and implement it differently based on Postgres semantics, right? But for now, let's start with a Mongo user store. And yeah, so basically, now we need to have a way to access this user store. Of course, we need to do the implementation. I know that we're going to do later on. But first of all, I'm going to show you this, right? So let's open up handler, right? because, for example, I'm going to put this function actually up top because that's the first one we're going to handle. So in handle get user, we should actually have access to our database, right? Because we're gonna get the ID, which is going to be c.params, and that's going to be the param ID, right? That's how we're gonna fetch the ID from the URL, right? But we need to find a way to actually retrieve to access our database. How are we gonna do that? Well, we're gonna make a type, and that's gonna be a user handler type, and that's going to be a structure. And inside of this user handler, we are going to say the user store, because it could be that we also need other storages. Maybe we need, I don't know, a booking store. Maybe we need the reservation store to access stuff, right? And the beautiful of doing it like this is that you can have multiple storages that have different databases, right? But hey, it happens, right? You could say, most of the tutorials don't cover this, but in the real case scenario, like in my job, Trading Light, we have different databases. We have MongoDB, Postgres. We have 3-4 different databases that for different data sets, right? So we're going to say user store is going to be a db.user_store, right? The interface, not the Mongo, the interface. So everything that implements the user store can be put inside of this. So what we could do now is with this ID, right? Now we could say, for example, we could say next thing we're going to do, because this is a plain function, we're going to make this a function receiver of user handler. So we're going to say h from handler. We're going to say is a pointer of a user handler, and that's going to have this handle get user function attached, right? We're going to do the same thing here, user handler. And this is going to be handle get users. So what's going on now? Now we have access to this user store, right? We could say h from handler, user store, get user by ID, and this is the ID, right? And that's going to return a user and an error, all right? And if there is an error, we are going to return this error, right? And otherwise, we are going to return C.json with the user it returned. Yes. Cool. The next thing we're going to do is make a constructor. We're going to say func new user handler. That's going to be a pointer to a user handler. And we're going to return this user handler. And we are going to say we're going to get some arguments here in our constructor. It's not really a constructor, but it's a constructor function, right? Some kind of a factory. If you, I don't like the word factory, but if you know what I mean. New user handler, that's going to take in a user store, which is going to be a db.user_store, right? And we're going to say here that the user store is going to be the user store we have inside of the user handler. Now, if you go to main, we're going to have some problems here because API handle get user doesn't exist because we refactored that to that it's attached to the user store strict user handler. So we're going to say the user handler is going to be an API.new user handler, right? And now we're going to specify what interface we're going to use, and we're going to use the MongoDB stuff, but it's not implemented yet. So that's first we need to do that, right? Because otherwise we're going to have trouble. So we're going to open up our DB. And we're going to make a new constructor here. It's going to be a new Mongo user store. And we're going to take in a client, which is going to be a Mongo.client, a pointer to a Mongo.client, and it's going to return us a Mongo user store, which basically means we're going to return a reference or pointer to a Mongo user store. And inside of this store, we're going to have a client, which is going to be a pointer to a Mongo.client. Right, so we're going to say that the client here is going to be C. Actually, to be honest, we can make it client if that is a little bit more convenient. Or clear, that's that. So now we can go back to main, and now we can actually say new user handler. We're going to specify a user store. Actually, to be honest, that's not true. Yeah, it's true. It's true. So the user handler takes a user store. Any arbitrary user store, anything that implements the user store interface can be put into that. So that's fine. And in our case, it's going to be a db.new MongoDB user store. And we need a client, but we already have that client. That client is already been made here. You know what I mean? So I'm going to delete all that stuff we don't need anymore. Boom, boom, boom. We're going to make this client. Where are we going to do that? Actually, let's make it here. And let's make our user handlers here. Handler initialization is going to happen here. Here is a user handler with a new Mongo store. That's fine. Of course, it's going to complain because we didn't implement it yet, but we're going to do that very soon. And then we're going to say instead of API handle get users, it's going to be user handler. Handle get users, user handler, handle get user, right? That's what we're going to do. The next thing we need to do is implement this get user by ID. We need to implement that in our Mongo store. So we're going to say func. We're going to call this S from store, Mongo store, get user by ID. It's going to take in an ID, which is going to be a string. And later on, we're going to specify that we're going to have queries. Maybe we want to find a specific user or something, right? But that's for later. And that is going to return a pointer to a types user and an error. Just like this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Center this thing, I mean. So how do we do that again? Well, it's very simple. We need collection and all that stuff, right? So we need to have some more values inside of this user store. So we're going to say a collection. First of all, we could make a DB name. That's going to be a string. And then we're going to say a collection here. And that's going to be, I think, a pointer to a mongo.collection. Just like that. So if we make a new Mongo store, right? What we're going to do is we're going to say that the collection is going to be client database. Wait, we don't need the DB name actually. Or maybe we do. Are we going to hardcode the database name? I think we're going to do that. I think we're going to say a constant here. And we're going to call this DB name. And I'm going to make it full caps. And that's going to be hotel reservation. Right? So we're going to say DB name here. DB name. And then the collection is going to be users. What we could do is also make a const here. It can be private. Users call is going to be private, I mean. Users, right? And this hotel DB name, we're going to move that to something else because it's not at its place in user. We are in the user file, the user store file. We're going to make a global const file for DB, right? So that's going to be the user call. User call, that's pretty fine. And then what you could do actually, we could copy this whole shebang and we could say that the collection here is going to be this one. We can delete this. We need to make a comma here, that's fine. And the DB name we don't need it anymore because it's hard-coded, right? So now if we make a new user store, a Mongo user store, it's going to create a collection directly so we have access to it, right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get a cursor and a cursor. And that's going to be s.call.find1 decode. We did that in the beginning. So we're going to say, what are we fetching? A user. So we're going to instantiate a new user. We're going to say var user is going to be a types.user. So we're going to find one based on the ID, but we need a context, right? Very important. We need a context, because this find one needs a context. So what we're going to do is instead of making this an ID, we're going to make a context. And context always needs, the idiom is that we place context always as the first argument in our functions. You're going to see that everywhere, right? The context is always going to be the first argument. So we're going to say context.context. Like this, and ID. The problem is that our interface does not take a context, so we're going to change this up. We're going to say context.context. That's our function signature. So we're gonna find one. We're gonna put the CTX in here. So you see, that's why context is so important. We're gonna pass it everywhere, right? And we can cancellation and all that stuff if we want timeout, if we really want that, but I don't think it's needed in this case. Find one. We need to specify a query. So, and the query is basically a bsom.m. And we're going to query by ID. That basically means we're going to say ID. Because why is it an underscore? Because that's basically what we have. Where is my compass here? That's this one, right? This ID here. That's how we're going to query that, right? If you want to query by name, we need to specify first name or something. That could be. And then we're going to decode that into a user. Once again, we need to specify the user as a reference, as a pointer, so it can actually do stuff. And that's going to return an error. So we're going to say if r is going to be, it's not going to be a cursor. That's going to be an error. If r is this and the error is not null, in that case, we are going to return nil. An empty pointer is nil. And then we're going to say the error. On the other side, we are going to return the user and nil because the error is empty, right? Of course, user is basically a non-pointer, so we're going to basically pass it by reference and it's going to be fine. Of course, we forgot to basically say that bson m ID, and you're going to make the mistake by basically putting this ID in here, and that's not going to work. Why? Because in Mongo, the IDs are basically an object ID, and an object ID is kind of different than a string, although it's a string, but yeah, Mongo library treats it a little bit differently. So we need to convert this ID to an object ID. So I'm going to make a helper function for that. And instead of making these helper functions instead of user, we can directly basically go one back and make a new file, and we're going to call this db.go, just for general DB purposes, right? User is for user things, db.go is for general DB things. So we're going to make a new DB file, and I'm going to say, first of all, I'm going to copy this user, DB, no, not this one, user store, yes, this one. First of all, I'm going to basically delete this, not delete, but remove this DB name and paste it in here, right? Because DB name is nothing to do with user, so we're going to move that to the DB file. That's fine. The user call can stay because it's user specific, right? The next thing we're going to do is a function, and that function is going to be called toObject ID. That will take in a string, which is going to be a string, and that will return I think it's going to be a primitive object ID. Not quite sure if that's true. So we're going to say that the bit of, we're going to say OID, obj ID. We're going to call it OID from object ID. It's also going to return an error, but we're going to skip that error because, yeah, it is what it is. We could actually panic in this case. We will panic. Sometimes it's good to panic. So we're going to say it's going to be primitive.object ID from hex. We're going to pass in this ID here. And then we're going to say that if the error is not null, we're going to panic error, right? And it's going to print out a nice error message, hopefully, if that's the case, but we won't encounter that. On the other side, we're going to return OID. I hope this is going to work. That's nice. So right now, what we can do here is instead of providing the string here, we can say object ID to object ID to object ID ID, right? And why do we have access to object ID? Because it's in the same DB folder. Everything in the same DB folder. Oh, my shoulder still sore from lifting. Everything in the same folder is accessible without the prefix. We don't need to prefix it with db.object ID. It could be just to object ID because it's in the same module, right? I think we are actually good, to be honest. Yeah. Let me open up main to see if everything is nice and smooth there. Yes. That's fine. So the next thing we need to do is open up our user handler. Boom. All right, so now we're gonna have a problem. Why? Because this get user by ID, remember, now takes also in a context. So we're gonna make a context here, and we're gonna call this a context.background. That's to make a parent background context, and we're gonna pass this context inside of this function. We could make it a context with timeout, but we're not gonna do that. We're gonna just make a simple context background. And always nice to do is make this nice by making a var and encapsulate all these variables. And then we have this nice var encapsulated, formatted stuff here. Yeah, I think we're good, to be honest. Handler get user, it's fine. I think, let me open up main to double check here. I think we have our user. Yeah, I think everything is fine. Let's make run. Let's make run this thing. And let's open up our, let me find, it's going to be a local host, 5000, I guess. API/user. This is not the thing we want because we need to specify an ID. This is a list users, right? Remember, this is going to be the list users. But if you want a user by ID, we need to specify an ID here. So first of all, let's try to give it a wrong ID. We're going to do something randomized, right? And you see what's going to happen here? Now we have the provided hex string is not a valid object ID. And that's actually bad, right? That's actually bad because if somebody puts in a wrong ID, we are going to crash our program, and we need to fix that, right? And we're going to fix that soon. Actually, we're going to fix it immediately, but first we're going to fetch the real user. So this is the guy we need, I think. Let me refresh. Yes, we have two James, by the way. So I'm going to fetch this one. Can I copy this? Probably not. What's going on? Let me copy it like this. And then I'm going to put this guy inside of here. Press enter. Of course, our program is completely borked, right? It's completely borked. So let's kill this, make run once again. That's why you cannot panic, right? I just want to show you this, that we really need to handle this ID because otherwise we're going to have issues. If I press enter, you see now it works, right? Now we're going to have a nice ID here. The first name is James and the last name is at the water cooler. And I think I'm going to install a JSON or Postman or something so we can actually use it a little bit better. So that's that. Okay, so we can find users pretty fine, right? It's amazing. The next thing we're going to do is insert users and see the database, and then we can start hotels, bookings, reservations, link things together, authentication, all that stuff. But the first thing we're going to do is fix that error. And how are we going to do that, right? So the problem resides in the fact that we have our DB user store, right? And we are calling to object ID directly in here, right? So what we are going to do basically is we are going to handle this a little bit better. Let's open up db.go. And instead of, can you guys see this? Of course you can't. So, because my screen is in the way. Now we can see. So instead of returning a primitive object ID, we're also going to return the error, actually, to be honest, guys. We're going to return the error. So we could do, actually, to be honest, actually, we don't need this function. We don't need it. Isn't that easy? We're saving lines. I just changed my mind, right? That's the cool stuff. Doing it organically, things are gonna mess up. You're gonna change your mind. Things are not gonna work out, and you're gonna change course, change direction. That's software engineering. That's what it is. We are gonna open up user store. Yes, yeah. And then here, what we're gonna do? First of all, we're gonna validate, right? Validate the correctness of the ID. So what we're going to do, because it's a string, you could also do this basically in the handler. But I think it's going to be nasty. I want to keep my handlers very clean, and I think we could do it here. So we're going to say that the OID error is going to be primitive, and that's why we don't need it. Object ID hex thingy. We're going to pass in the ID, right? And then if the ID is not null, we are going to return nil and the error, right? And then instead of doing to object ID here, we're just going to say the OID, right? I made a little bit of a mistake. But where? That's the question. Composite literal at 38. Let's go to 38 here. Oh, yeah. All right, let's delete the spaces here. Validate the correctness of the ID. Actually, to be honest, we're going to delete this comment because that's something I'm going to learn you. Think nobody's learning you that. Don't make useless comments. Right, I see a lot of people doing get user by ID here, and then they say gets the user by ID. No shit. What did we expect? So don't do that, right? So we're going to see here a primitive object ID from X. It makes sense that we are basically converting this to an object ID, and that we, if it's not working, we're going to return the error. That's how you need to interpret it. That's how you need to learn to read code. Another fact is that most of the time you make comments, but you don't update them. So what's going to happen is a project is going to sit full of outdated comments. Because you need to maintain code, but you also need to maintain comments. And you know what I mean? It's a lesson I learned. Of course, I make comments, but I only make comments when it's very specific. Something you need to know. If you work inside of this code and there is a comment from me, that basically means pay attention, read it because it's important, right? All right, so make run. Yes, that's fine. I'm thinking what we need to do here. So this is going to work pretty fine, right? But if we specify, for example, an incorrect ID, then it's going to return an error. The provided hex string is not a valid object ID. The problem is that this error is fine, but it's not a JSON error. How are we going to do that? Right? And I think this is the last thing we're going to do for this video. We're going to make a centralized error handler. Right? So how are we going to do that? I have actually no clue because it's GoFiber and it's the first time. I think we could do... Let's do some documentation, right? Something you need to learn also is look up the documentation sometimes to get things done. Let me quickly open up GoFiber. GoFiber! Boom! That's this. If you guys have any feedback on the courses or something, is my font need to be bigger? Am I talking too fast? Am I doing a good job? You can also tell me, am I doing a bad job? Give me feedback so I can update and make the course better, because we're going to update it and it's going to be for you for your whole lifetime. What do we need docs here actually? I want to have a centralized error handler. Can I search error handling? Catching errors. I want to have a app.use recover new. Do we want that? Fiber new error. Aha! Default error handler. Context. What is this? What's going on here? Custom error handler. Aha, this one is what we need. So we're gonna copy this thing, copy, and we're gonna make a custom error handler. That's what we need. That's what we want. So can I paste it in here? Wait, I need to paste it like that. Probably. I'm gonna save this. Fiber new. We need the fiber config here. Let me copy this stuff here. I know it's a little bit nasty. I know. Wait, what is config? Config is fiber config. What I'm going to do is this. I'm going to say var config is going to be this one. Just like that. And then I don't need this and I don't need this. And I can save and hopefully... Nope, it's not working for me. Maybe I need this actually. Yes, that's working. Haha! So we have our config here. I'm gonna delete this stuff. Code is fiber internal server error. We're gonna make the error handler much better than it is right now, but that's for later on. We're gonna have custom codes and everything. So because error handling is very important, and sometimes you need to be careful because we don't want to show errors to the user that they don't that they cannot see, because some errors are basically internal errors, and it could be leaking information of our application, right? So we need to be very careful, and that's what we're also going to do. I'm going to learn you that. But first of all, I'm going to refactor this a little bit here. It returns an error. This is the error we got. What we're going to do is basically delete the whole shebang, and we are going to return CJSON. It's CTX. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to call it CJSON, and we're going to return a map. So later on, we're going to make our own error struct, but now we're going to do it like this. We're going to do it like this for now. What's going on here? It's going to be a map string, and that's going to be the error. And the string of the error is going to be add error. That's what we're going to do. And then, of course, if we make a new fiber here, we're going to say, we're going to specify the config. Can I do this? Look at this. Beautiful. Make run. Boom. And if we now make a mistake, we have a JSON error. Of course, I'm going to add a status and everything and yada, 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 and do the correct statuses and all that stuff. But for now, this is already beautiful. Now you see how you can make your own error handler. But it needs a lot of work still, but that's for later on. And I'm pretty exhausted. I'm going to lie. These lessons are pretty exhausting for me. I'm trying to do my best. I'm trying to teach it as clean as possible. And I swear to God, if you, by the end of this course, by the end of the whole full-time GoDev program, you're going to be such a chat. You have no fucking clue how good you're going to be. I'm teaching you legit everything. This is going to be my masterpiece, my master work, right? My life work, right? That's what it's going to be. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next episode. Peace.